Welcome back to another episode of the Adventure Athletes podcast. Now again, this episode is a little bit different because I sit down with a nutritionist, Rachel White, to talk about all things nutrition. Now when this episode was recorded, it was in the build up to my 6 in 6 challenge where I ran 6 ultramarathons over 6 days. Now when you're listening to this, hopefully I should have finished the challenge and completed it and been all right, but you'll know that a lot of my questions are sort of tailored towards asking about those sorts of endurance events, selfishly, so I could help myself prepare for it as best I can, because what better way to get advice than to invite someone on a podcast and then share the information that I learn with the world. Now, if you do want to donate, I've extended the donations in the link below. I'm trying to raise £6,069. That's £1 for every life lost to suicide across England and Wales in 2023. And it's all going to Sport in Mind, a mental health charity that uses sport to help people with their mental health. So it's very, very apt. I'm hoping that I finished, and if you guys are following along, then yeah, let's see how I've done. No, I'm confident that I will be, but like I said, this was all recorded pre-challenge so I can get some time off what to do the challenge and some time off after. Now, before we go into the episode, which I'm super excited to share with you guys, here's a quick message from our friends over at Soulmate.
We're Soulmate. Whether you're new to running or an experienced runner, we've got you covered for both road and trail, from shoes to nutrition to running poles and everything in between. Use code ADVENTURE10 both in-store or online for 10% off your order.
And now, enjoy the podcast. What was your call to adventure?
It's a good question. I think it was just the desire to kind of see a bit more of the world and, I don't know, see what I could do as well. And I guess it doesn't always have to be... I think with adventure, I always think it has to be something like massive and big and... I don't know, somewhere super random, but actually I love like the little mini adventures that you can have, and the little things like even today, like cycling back from here, I think it's a bit of an adventure because somewhere I haven't been before and something, and I think I like that a bit of unknown is probably the main thing, and actually you realise you can do a lot more than you thought you probably could.
Yeah. Where did that sort of belief start to stem from then? Like, when did you start realising like, oh, I can do more than what I've ever done before?
I think it's probably seeing other people doing it. So through my work and kind of friends and stuff, seeing them push boundaries, like, well, why couldn't I run that or do it, or I don't know, go and go abroad and go and do those things. It kind of like, actually, if they're doing it, what's stopping me? And yeah. I think that was probably it. And then once you do it once, you're like, oh, actually, I can do a little bit more than I thought, and then it just escalates, I suppose, from there.
Yeah, it's quite dangerous, like especially with social media as well. Like, because like I've been trying to follow along with you pre-podcast, being like, oh well, you're like jetting off here and doing that, and trying to keep up with that, and then I'm like, that's my whole feed. It's just different people going about doing different things, and I'm like, well, I want to do that, but I also want to do that.
It's so dangerous. And social media, like Instagram, hats off to them, their algorithm, I don't know what they do, but it's incredible, because I did a cycling trip in January, February time. I came back, and honestly, it was like a marketing campaign for cycling. I could not get away from, the more you look at something, the more it feeds you, and it was just races and this and that, and I was like, I want to do this, I want to do that, and then other people pop up, and yeah, it's a dangerous game. It's exciting, but yeah, it can get a bit out of hand. And then I think sometimes you just feel like everyone's always doing stuff and going places in a way because that's what pops up, but then actually remember that's just classic like social media. It makes it look like everyone's doing exciting things all the time, but yeah, it's a dangerous game, but an exciting one, I think.
I've definitely got too caught up in it, where like you said, it always looks like people are doing things, and then I was like, well, I'm just gonna go out and do things all the time. And I put a post up the other day where I was like, this has been my past 12 weeks, and like every weekend I was out doing like a big event, and at the end of the post I was like, I think I might be burnt out. Like, I think, like, I've had it. Like, yeah, I know my diet's not the best, which I'm sure we'll get on to. But I was just like, yeah, I'm so done. But I've still got like another like 4 to 6 weeks of this, just because I've signed up to so many things.
Yeah, and it's hard not to do it. And I think you get so caught up that it's sometimes hard. And I think people that do a lot of kind of either whether it be exercise or kind of activities or love to kind of go on adventures, it's quite hard to not. And you're like, well, I've got a day off. What shall I do? And you're like, actually, you could just, sit and relax. But yeah, it's difficult, and it's not often until you look back and then you go, oh, hold on a second, maybe I should just take a little time out. But it's much easier to do it than not, I would say.
No, I love I love all the things I've done, but yeah, it is tiring. And yeah, I know the two things that I need to improve on: my diet and my sleep.
Yeah,
they're like the two most important things.
And that is probably most people. I'd say that do endurance stuff. Those are some of the key areas. I mean, diet people think about, and then often, and a lot of my kind of one-to-one consultations will always talk about sleep. And people are like, yeah, I don't really sleep, or I don't really prioritize that. And it's such a huge part, and it's not just, I mean, most people are doing work alongside other jobs, family, friends, other social commitments. They kind of forget that if they don't rest and recover, then you can't tick everything all at once. And, I'd be lying if I'd say I'm the best sleeper and I prioritize it all the time. But it's always getting that bit of a balance, but it's a bit of a forgotten one, I think. And yeah, easier said than done sometimes to improve it, but yeah, it's a common issue. Let's leave it at that.
Yeah. I do find it funny how like the two most important things are the ones that are the first to like get forgotten about.
Yeah.
Because people are like, oh yeah, well, I ice bath, I foam roll, I stretch, I do my mobility, I do my strength and conditioning. But yeah, my diet and my sleep are awful.
Yeah, I think it's always and obviously diet is literally my job and everything, so I hugely prioritize it, and it's often a bit of a hard sell because everyone's like, well, I do eat, so therefore you're kind of partially ticking it off, and making changes is so much more difficult than we think. Like, we are such creatures of habit. Even if you don't think you are, we often, walk the same direction to the shop, or we go on the same side of the road, we sit in the same train carriage, you have the same thing for breakfast just because that's what you have for breakfast. And making those changes, there's always barriers, and it's easier sometimes not to, and you can often get away with a bad diet for a certain amount of time. And that's, I think, where it's most difficult is like, yeah, I did run that ultra and I didn't eat anything because I felt sick, but I completed 50 kilometers. And you're like, well done, but how did you feel afterwards? Like, absolutely terrible, and recovery was awful, but they still did it, so you kind of get away with it. But I think a lot of it is actually you could do it so much better and enjoy it more. And I certainly know for myself in the past year, and I should have done this a lot earlier because I know better, I've literally got degrees in the stuff and it's my job, but really focused on, like, especially on like race day and events, like my nutrition. And I'm running so much better. I'm enjoying it. I'm running faster. I'm recovering better. And I'm like, oh, probably should have listened to that a long time ago. But it's often, a lot of people, it's kind of really obvious, but it's not. And then it's not until it goes really wrong. I tend to find people are then like, hold on, I should probably do something about this. But they've had that DNF. They've had that feeling absolutely terrible to need to do it. But yeah, and also it's not always that exciting, like when oh gosh, I need to make sure I eat breakfast or my snack. Like, it's not that jazzy, whereas you're like, oh, I could get a swanky, piece of equipment that's going to do all my massaging and this, or like hop in an ice bath. That's a bit more trendy, it's a bit more exciting, and I think you always want that more exciting thing rather than me being like, oh, we probably should have a piece of toast before we go for a run in the morning. Like, it doesn't really quite hit the same thing because, I don't know, it's not always what everyone wants to do, and that's fair enough, but it would help.
Yeah. I do find it funny looking at like these ultra endurance athletes and looking at their diets, and it's like Courtney Dauwalter is one of my favourite ultra runners ever.
She's
And she's just
mega.
like tacos and
Yeah.
nachos and just like lots of beer.
Yeah, and she's quite unusual in that case, but equally, you'll see her kind of mid race and she's got a burger kind of stuffed in her pocket and you're like, this is great. But I guess the thing is that she eats consistently. She also, has all sorts of other sports nutrition stuff with her. But what it shows is that actually the pros are taking it a bit more seriously, and it doesn't have to be, you don't just have to have gels or, really specific things. Food is food.
Yeah.
And there is better, most people aren't going to be able to tolerate a burger mid-run, but a lot of people can. Most people have stopped for kind of weirder things, and actually it's finding what works for you. And actually she's quite a good role model in terms of just like, she's got this pretty blasé attitude for an absolutely incredible lady. It's phenomenal. But actually, at least she's eating is the main thing, and there'll be a lot more going on that doesn't reach the cameras, because that's less exciting that she's having her tailwind or whatever. It's much more exciting that she's eating a burger midway, which I totally agree with. But it's a funny one, and when you get into the ultra world, anything goes. Like, I'm very partial to a cheese sandwich. That's like my number one go-to. There's nothing that makes me smile more than like midway cheese sandwich. I'm like, oh, this is great. But then that kind of breaks up the monotony of whatever I'm doing or out for the day. I'm like, oh, how exciting. And then move on. That probably makes me pretty sad, but it's the small things in life.
Yeah. With like the longer an event goes on for, I've always thought like real food then becomes more sort of like appropriate for what you're doing rather than like gels and stuff. Is that like true, or have I just made that up?
No, very much so. I mean, it doesn't have to be. I guess the thing is a lot of people, if you're running for, I don't know, let's say, 10 hours onwards, just gels often gets quite hard. I mean, they're fairly similar texture. Yes, there are different flavours and stuff and different types of ones, but they're sweet and they're the same. And actually you get, we call it kind of flavour fatigue, kind of taste fatigue. Actually, it's hard to eat the same thing all day, every day. Even if you weren't running, if I just gave you one food to eat all day, by the end of the day, you'd be like, yeah, I'm pretty done. Even if it's something you love and is delicious. And also what can happen is you just don't really get full, or kind of you don't get that feeling of fullness as well. And actually over those really long periods, people can get a bit hungry and you're like, oh, I'd never get hungry if I was running that long or whatever. But actually your stomach kind of needs that bit of bulk in there, and something just a bit different. And some people can get away. You will see, some of the pros and things will just smash that, but they've taken a long time to get to that point. They have practiced that to a T. That's not by accident. That is by precision to get to that point. And I think it's about variety. Plus, just smashing that many gels in that many hours is really expensive way to fuel. And great if you can afford it and can manage that many, absolutely. But most of the time, actually, that's going to bang on. I mean, these races aren't the cheapest things in the world generally. By the time you kind of thought about everything, then adding in, needing endless supply of gels is actually super expensive. And I find it, obviously, it's slightly different discipline, like triathlon or the Ironman events. They're sponsored by Morton, so I'm always getting all my clients to try this stuff, and they're like, I just can't afford this because it's absolutely bankrupting me buying, a shed ton of Morton just through all your training. So I'm like, you're going to have to switch it up, but then, at least you tolerate it at the time. But I think there's no right and wrong. Some people will have no gels and be very averse to them, whether for right or wrong reasons, and be like, I can't possibly have a gel. And then others will like, I couldn't possibly eat anything. And I don't believe there's anyone that sits on both ends of the spectrum. You've got to train yourself to do it. But I think variety is the spice of life, whatever that saying is. Actually, like I was saying with the cheese sandwich, if there's something that's a bit more exciting or you want it, that's going to help. And 8 hours in, you've been trudging along the Southwest Coast Path in January and you're feeling pretty sorry for yourself, another gel's probably not going to give that pick me up that you're hoping for, but some fizzy sweets might just be something a little bit different.
Yeah. I find it funny because the first ultra I did, I'd never eaten when I'd run before, and there was a requirement of like, oh, you have to carry 1,000 calories, like that's your, like it's got to be in your kit. We'll do a kit check and everything. And I was like, oh, I wasn't really planning on eating, so I just brought a jar of peanut butter and I just put it in my bag, and I was like, that's 1,000 calories and it's not too heavy. Didn't touch it, didn't eat the whole ultra, and then like I was like, yeah, that sucked.
How did you feel?
Like death, but I hadn't trained for it either. So
okay,
like,
there's a few
there
things.
was a lot of factors going into that.
You've learned a lot since then.
Yeah, but not straight away, because like the next ultra I did, again, I didn't eat anything.
Because you managed to get away with it the first time, and like, oh, if I do a bit more training, then I'll be alright.
Yeah, and then it was only end of last year that I was like, I should probably eat when I do these long runs, and it was because I was training for a world record tire flip, actually.
Oh wow.
And I was like, like I'm gonna be out for like 24 hours, so I need to eat.
Yeah.
So then in my training I was just like eating during my training, and now I can't run without eating.
Yeah.
And my running club find it funny because like I'll go to like our Wednesday trail run, and I'll turn up and everyone's like, what snacks have you got, Will? And I pull out like a pack of biscuits. They're like, we're only running 10k. Like, you don't need a pack of biscuits, a pack of sweets and all of this. And I'm like, I just get hungry.
Yeah, but better that than equally they'll be in their camp and be like, oh, you don't need it for 10k, or you don't need it for 20k, or you could probably get away for 30k, and then that pushes. And yeah, I'm always the one that's always got extra snacks in my bag. I stand at the start line sometimes, I'm like, have I got this totally wrong? Like, why is my bag totally full and no one else? Like, I've got a full 12-litre vest and everyone else is in like 5-litre vest with nothing in. I'm like, what have I got that you haven't? And then generally it's food, and it's like, I think it's sticking to your guns and knowing what works for you, because it is difficult, and people are very, I guess the thing with nutrition, just full stop, sports or not, is because everyone eats, everyone's got opinions on food, which is great, but often can be misinformed and personal opinions rather than what necessarily kind of works. And the first ultra I ever did, so I did a 50k up in the Peak District, and I was already a dietitian, but I'd just done started my sports nutrition kind of top up degree, and it was kind of my first ultra. Hadn't done a huge amount of trail running and stuff before that, and I was like, right, I know I need to start fueling early. You know, I had loads of snacks. Like, my bag was honestly so full. I took my jacket off and could hardly fit it in, because there was just no space. But I was going up the first hill. It was about 45 minutes in. I was eating my banana, kind of like, I'm on track. This is what I'm doing. This guy passed me and was like, oh, why are you eating that now? And I was like, because that's my plan, and you need to start fueling early, you know, all these kind of things. And we're like, oh my god, have I got this totally wrong? And it's like, oh, I wouldn't eat that now. And I was like, okay. And off he popped. But I was like, well, I'm halfway through a banana and I don't want to put it back in my vest because it's going to squish and that's gross. So I'll just keep eating it and just carry on being like, I kind of feel like this is my plan, but now like, have I got it totally wrong? You know the science, but then in practical perspectives. And then about 20-30k later, who did I come across? Said chap. And I just cruised on past him, and I thought to myself, I was like, I obviously don't know if it was, but I was like, I think that banana's done me here. I think it's given me the energy later on. I was like, do I say something, like a little snide comment of like, oh, you should have eaten that banana earlier? And I didn't. And, you know, so many different reasons why we were running at different paces. But I think kind of the moral of that story is have your plan and stick to it. You know, if you like to eat on those shorter runs, it's much better that you're eating than feeling hungry, not feeling strong and doing things. But we often kind of feel like we shouldn't. And I think that's where now some of like the pros, especially in the ultra scene, seeing how much they're smashing food wise is actually really good, because previous was like, well, you know, they don't drink that much and they're running it in, you know, half the time I am. Why do I need it? Yeah. Whereas actually, if you're now seeing, you know, the lot at the front, you know, really getting down some serious amounts, then you're like, oh, well, if it's good enough for Tom Evans, then I probably should be doing that. And that's quite a nice thing that finally people are kind of seeing that influence of actually they're doing the right thing and taking it seriously and pushing and going further. But I think always stand your guns. There's never be afraid to be eating those biscuits.
Yeah. How do you sort of like put a plan in place for like an ultra or like an endurance event, or like are there like set principles you follow, or is it just like, right, this is like what you've practiced?
For me or for clients, or a bit of both?
Bit of both.
So I guess there's kind of a few things to do, and it depends on the person. So if I'm doing it for a client, for example, what we'll do is kind of get a bit of an overall kind of baseline, kind of where things are at. Have they eaten before while they're training? How's it gone? Any problems? This, and kind of barriers as well. And then looking at the race, seeing I guess what the race is, what's the setup. Are they traveling to it? Are they, what's the aid stations provides? All of those little things kind of are really helpful in terms of kind of informing a plan. In terms of kind of, I guess, the general principles is preparation is so key. You even know yourself. Like the other day I went for a run. I drove over up to go for the Brecon Beacons. I got 10 minutes down the road and I realised I forgot my trainers. And you're like, oh my goodness, why did I not get my trainers out? Like I just wasn't prepared. I then got there and didn't have enough water because I hadn't really thought about the fact there wasn't any water fill-ups. And I was so unprepared. And I was like, what am I doing? Like, come on, you know better than this. And it's thinking. And that's the kind of thing with races and events, is that preparation. If you know you're going to be out there for 10 hours, plan to be out there for 10 hours. Don't be like, oh, well, I might do it in 8. Great if you do. Much better to plan for longer. And in terms of, I guess, the amounts, and that is individual, so there is a real trend of like more and more carbs. So generally do it by like grams of carbohydrate per hour. Overall calories does come into it, especially if it's a really long or multi-day, and a bit of protein as well, but come back to that. But carbohydrates are king. That is the key. Like, if you're not getting carbs in, then that's your number one mistake. How many you're getting in, I guess, is where it kind of blurs. Generally, for longer time, you're looking between 60 to 90 grams of carbs per hour. Some people can manage higher. That would be if someone is pushing it, is kind of a pretty decent athlete and is kind of really used to it. So I have a client, he does all sorts of mad things and massive challenges, and we've been working up to 100 grams of carbs an hour. But that's taken a bit of time, and he's exceptionally good at smashing gels, which is very helpful to kind of get that booster. So it's working out where someone's at and building up. So I had a client, for example, yesterday who has really struggled with loads of gut issues, and she's got quite a block in terms of eating and kind of is quite convinced she can't. But, through little mouthfuls and different strategies, we're building up towards that. She's probably not going to hit that 90 grams anytime soon, but actually if she gets in a consistent 40 grams of carbs in her race in end of August, actually that would be a massive win, because it's so far from where she started. So kind of looking at that, and then that's a mixture of thinking, what do the race provide? Can you get stuff en route? Have you tried it before? The number one rule of sports nutrition is don't try anything new on race day. We all do it. I've done it, everyone has, but where possible, just try not to, because it's always that one thing that you're like, oh, that would be delicious, which then causes problems, and then you blame, whatever it is, and you don't want that to cause issues or make your day a lot worse. Other things I guess we consider is looking at fluid and hydration, often really forgotten. There's a lot of practical, I guess, aspects to that, as well as like, what are you carrying? Especially for the longer stuff, obviously everyone's got vests, but how much are you going to store in your vest? What do you have access to? What do you have space for, as well? And then the frequency of aid stations in terms of filling up, or how to do that. And then balance of electrolytes or not, or carb drinks. And And that's quite preference. So like, I don't like the carb drinks. I just think they taste rubbish. I just haven't found one I enjoy. So I stay clear of those and prefer to eat my carbohydrates. Whereas for a lot of people, drinking carbs can be a really good way to get a decent amount in without thinking about it, and then top up with food. So it's finding that kind of personal preference. And there's no kind of one set way of doing it, but I think it's just being that prepared. I mean, loads of people, they invest in coaches, they invest in all of this, they've got all the equipment, but then turn up on the start line having not thought what they're going to eat, and then get to an aid station and be like, oh, don't fancy that, and then a bit caught short. So it's just being that one step ahead of the game, and knowing and feeling confident about your plan, I think, is a huge thing, because especially with, tummy issues and kind of gut stuff, it's actually, if you feel confident, that goes a long way to helping with that. For me personally, what I like to do, and I'm a pen and paper kind of girl, I'm not a spreadsheet lady, I'll sit there and I'll write, look at the course in terms of, especially with a lot of ultras, trail, they can be pretty hilly, ups and downs. That can affect what you're eating. If you're using poles going uphill, yes, you're moving slower, but poles make it difficult to eat because your hands are full. You're running downhill, a bit easier, but if it's quite technical, you need to look where you're going. Not very easy to eat. So it's thinking about where those opportunities, I guess, are, or if there's going to be a block that's going to be particularly difficult. So think, right, I need to make sure I eat before, that ascent, because that's going to be difficult. And then at the top, I write it down, look into what's at the aid stations. Do I like that? Do I not? I am so indecisive when it comes to food because I like food. I go into like an aid station, especially if it's a bigger race where there's more of a supply, and I'm like, oh, this is nice, oh, I like that. And it's like, me browsing the supermarket. I like walk up and down, have a look, then pick stuff, and then get chatting. The next thing I know, I've been in there for 15 minutes just because I've just been there. So what I've tried more recently is to be a bit more strategic. So I did, for example, like Lakeland 50 last year was my kind of longest race I've ever done. So I was like, right, I need to really like sort myself out. So I looked at all the lists and I picked the thing that I was going to choose for each aid station. So I knew when I got to aid station 1, I was going to have flapjacks. So I walked in, I picked up my flapjack, filled my flask up and left. So I didn't get distracted by everything else and kind of other people, because then that made me so much more efficient. I can't tell you how pleased I was with my kind of strategy. And I'd written it and I'd saved it as the background on my phone. So I just got my phone out, had a look, and was like, oh yeah, checkpoint 1, flapjacks, fill up water. And I sent myself little prompts, because you think it was really obvious to fill your flasks up, but you get distracted, or you're 8 hours in or whatever, your mind's not in the most beautiful state, you just forget those little things, or like leave your rubbish behind, and then you end up with you've got so much stuff kind of stuffed in your pockets, you can't find out what's food or what's wrappers. So it's just little things like that can just make it just a bit easier, and it's just those controllables, I think, are the main things. And with my clients, for example, I will write them a plan, and the days before, what we need to do, thinking about even the simple things like checking if you're staying in a hotel somewhere, do they do breakfast? Do they do it early enough for pre-race? Can you order something so you don't get to the night before and they're like, oh no, we can't do that, and you're like, oh, panic. Or where, especially abroad races, where are you going? Are there restaurants nearby? Is there shops that you can get stuff from? Or what do you need to take with you? And it's all those little things that just minimize that stress for when you arrive, and then you realize, oh my God, there's no shop, and I thought I could buy bread, but I don't seem to be able to. Now I don't know what to do. It's just trying to make life a little bit easier, and it doesn't have to be complex. It really doesn't have to be difficult, and I think people often overcomplicate it from a nutrition perspective, but it's thinking it simply. So I've been trying to kind of push my intake recently, me getting up to kind of 80-90 grams of carbs an hour. So what I do is I separate it out into between checkpoints. So I've got my, start to checkpoint 1 in my front, and then I've got a Ziploc bag with checkpoint 1 to checkpoint 2 food in it. So I just get it out, replace it in. So I don't have to think, oh, what should I be having? I've already pre-thought that, and I've got some things I could switch in and out because... And plus, I appreciate I've got the knowledge a bit more to make those things. but it's just making it easier. And then I pick the next bag out, and then if I'm getting towards the checkpoint, I'm like, oh god, I've still got some more food. Okay, I better eat that quickly because I haven't finished that. So it's simplifying it, but having that plan, but then also thinking about plan B as well. And that's where I think people fall down on, is plan A starts to go wrong. They're like, I've got my gels, I've got this, I can't eat. Actually, what we don't want to do is you just stop eat because you're like, well, this isn't working, so I'm just going to not eat, because that's when things then go downhill. And so it's having that plan B of like, okay, I can't manage this. So the girl I was speaking to yesterday, like, right, if that goes wrong, Coca-Cola works really well for you. Have that as your plan B. Fill that soft flask up at the aid station with 500 mils of Coke. Yes, it's not the most dreamy thing ever, but it tastes so good when you're running, and it's a good amount of carbs. If you know you can take that, stick with what is working rather than kind of not just stopping and not having anything. And so it's having that and almost having that in your locker so that you know, right, if this goes wrong, I've got X or Y, or something stashed in my bag that I know I could have just in case, and I can kind of switch and swap it out. So it does take quite a lot of planning, but once you kind of get in the swing of it, actually it's a bit of kind of carbon copy. It's just that preparation, and an hour's preparation will honestly make so much difference. I genuinely, truly believe that.
I'm the worst person to talk to about this.
Here we go. No, you can prove.
So I said about like the past 12 weekends, I've just been like boom, boom, boom. It literally, like, I'll have my car packed Friday night, go away weekend, get back, and I've just got like a box that I just like pull out of the car, and that's what you saw in my kitchen. I just dump it on the floor, and then it goes through the week, and then it gets to a Friday, and I'm like, I need to pack for the weekend, and then I'm like, I still haven't unpacked from last weekend, so I literally just like take it all out, just dump stuff back in, then I'm like, oh, that'll do, and I just chuck it back in, and then I get to wherever I'm going, I'm like, this is so unorganized. I need to like prep everything a bit more. And then like food wise, I always forget about, that's like the last thing on my list, so then I'm like, I'll just go Tesco's in the morning.
Yeah, and even if it is just having that like baseline, I guess, shopping list that every week I'm gonna need this bar, those bread rolls and things, so then you kind of tick off those boxes. And it is really difficult, and I appreciate in like lists of priority, food sits right at the top, and I will rarely be caught short at any situation. If I don't have my food plans, then people should worry about me, because they're like, what's going on? And then other things I won't plan as much, like travel and things like that. I'll be pretty disorganized at, but I'll have everything laid out from a food perspective. So there's always something that's more difficult, but I suppose it's having those like fail-safe options ready, so that actually, if I haven't organized to have much more, I know I've got a few gels kind of kicking around. I know I've got a couple of bars that I'm happy with. And there's always something you can, stash in, say whether I'm on my bike or kind of running. I've always got kind of an emergency something just in case. I mean, I've always got an emergency snack on me, full stop, in life. But it's just thinking what those like simple, easy things, and it doesn't have to be exciting, as I said. Go and buy, a couple of flapjack bars from the supermarket. Get a banana, done. At least, you've got something. And I guess it's finding that priority, or making it, do you want to make it like a priority as well, I guess, is kind of part of it. Because until you've got those real motivations to do those changes, it's really difficult, as I say. There's loads of barriers to changing things as we do.
So for someone like me that's like never put any sort of plan in place, to being like organized, like how would you like get me there? Because like at the moment all I do is I'm like, right, I'll buy some Squares bars,
they're great,
go to
big fan.
And then I'm like, I'll buy some like Aldi brand Mars bars, because I love a Mars bar. And then I'm like, I'll buy a couple of bags of sweets, and then if I'm feeling like happy with it all, and then I'll be like, I'll get like a steak bake. And like that's my like, that'll do. But like, it's probably not the best.
I I mean, I've had worse.
Okay.
You've got food. There's a good amount of carbs in there. I guess it's thinking like how long you're going to be out there. You know, and also what are you trying to achieve as well? Like how hard are you pushing it? Are you training for something specifically? Because we don't always need to smash, a serious amount of carbs all day, every day. But it's thinking about actually, are you is this training for a specific race, for example? You've got something coming up. Actually, I know on that race day I'm going to have to do, put a bit more kind of thought into it. Why don't I do the thinking now and put that into practice so I know that actually those are my favourite, sweets. I like Squares bars, so I've got those. Squares bars and cornflake. There's a new Squares and cornflake bar.
Okay.
I would highly recommend. It's great. I've got one actually for today for my cycle home. Is thinking about it. I guess is just spending 5 minutes thinking. Right. Okay. I'm out for 4 hours. I'm going to try and hit 60 grams carbs per hour. Actually, what does that look like? My Squares bar, I'm going to get this wrong, it's about 30 grams or so per bar. So I've got that. My sweets, generally like a handful, is about 20-30 grams. Actually, okay, I've got an hour's worth of food there. How many hours worth of food do I have, and how achievable is that? And it's just taking 10 minutes of thinking about that, but it's also thinking about that timings around, we've got kind of whilst you're running nutrition, but it's also thinking about the before and after. And those are often, I'd say, the biggest missed opportunities I see with athletes. And, to call someone an athlete, you don't need to be smashing, records and things. I think anyone that does things is an athlete. And it's thinking like that of actually, have I gone into that run, whether it be the casual one on a Saturday or a more serious or, a more significant training run, have I gone into that in as good a state as I could do to give myself the best chance to enjoy it? And it's thinking a bit like a battery. Is my battery full? Or am I kind of on 50% because I haven't had breakfast because I woke up a bit late and I didn't have anything or didn't have the right stuff? Okay, is there an opportunity to have that bit of a booster there to kind of start? Because if you think about it like a battery, if you start it, think about your Garmin or whatever. Most people wouldn't dream, I know, kind of that do endurance stuff, wouldn't dream of going out without it on, pretty highly charged. And you wouldn't go out with it 50% charged because it might die and then that'd be sad. I might get lost because I don't have navigation, or you don't get your Strava, whatever's the barrier there. You would always charge it up to give you that kind of bit of fail safe, a bit of kind of support, I suppose. So it's thinking about your nutrition the same. Is if you start 50%, you're going to go into that red quite soon. It's thinking you want to top that up, and we store energy in our body in the form of glycogen, so it's stored in our muscles and in our liver, and that's what gives us our energy to do our day-to-day things. But when that runs out, that's when we hit the wall or bonk. So if you watch a marathon, go to the 20-mile mark, there's the wobblers, there's the people killed over on the side, and that's because their bodies have gone, yeah, no, done, dusted. You've used all your energy. You need to stop now. This is silly. And so and if you don't start at 100, you're much closer to that point of body going no than you are top. I appreciate in the longer stuff it's not as higher intensity, but you're out there for longer, so there's still propensity to hit that very much early on. So it's thinking, actually, can I get something nice and easy? Could it be a glass of fruit, getting some fruit juice as a simple, easy way just to get a bit of a top up of carbs before I start? It's not complex. You don't have to spend ages preparing it. It doesn't have to be a beautifully curated, Instagram worthy bowl of breakfast, like far from it. Like a couple of slices of white toast with some jam and a glass of orange juice. Beautiful. Ticks so many boxes. So it's thinking about that. And then recovery is where I'd say most people miss out as well. So especially, as you say, you've had a really busy time. You've got back to back to back to back. Yes, you've got during the week, but you're not sitting down all week. Even if it is through the coaching and, everything else you're doing, you're not sitting doing nothing. You actually want to make sure that your body is recovering as quickly as possible to get you back in action for life and day. And even for most people, they could go on their long run in the morning, but they might have kids to look after in the afternoon or whatever, or family time, or just things to do, housework or whatever it might be. actually, if you're not refueling your body, then you're going to make it a lot more difficult for yourself in day to day, or, you know, going to work, for example, can get a lot more difficult. And that's what I hear. People are like, oh, I'm doing really well with my runs, but I just feel terrible otherwise. And you're like, okay, there's something missed here. And with recovery, it's mainly around protein, but also carbohydrates as well. So the carbohydrates are refilling those stores in your body, kind of filling that kind of battery back up. Your protein is helping from muscles kind of repair from that perspective. Rehydration as well. So often if we get dehydrated, that can affect our performance. It also affects our concentration and how we feel as well, and kind of recovery. So actually really important for kind of day to day, especially if someone has, you know, got quite a functioning job, a highly functioning job, or, you know, needs to concentrate. If you're dehydrated, you're making that a lot more difficult. And then rest as well is a big thing. So from a recovery side, it's thinking, do I have something nice and easy to do that? And the protein shakes as well can be quite good. But number one, best easy thing, chocolate milk. You can buy it from the supermarket. You know, bash that down, nice and easy. It's got protein, it's got carbs, it's got fluid. Tick. 3 ticks, easy. I'm not a big like flavoured milk person myself, so I found some of like the high protein yogurts, or like yogurt drinks, can be quite good, because that's a nice easy thing to like bash down, move on, done. And at least I know I've kind of kick-started. It's not completely done, obviously, but you've kick-started that process. And it's thinking about those easy wins, I suppose, where you could just add in something simple, yet you get so much more from it. And often I'd say some of the biggest kind of changes I see with my clients is just that focus on, actually, I haven't eaten for a number of hours and I'm about to go out for a 4-hour run. I should probably have a snack. Okay, have that little bit, or that glass, you know, a fruit juice, for example. Having that, just not having those long periods, and they're like, oh, I feel a bit better, a bit more energized, I bounce back a bit quicker. And it doesn't have to be complex, you know, you don't have to prepare stuff, but it's just taking that one step, just to kind of have that little think about it, or have something in your car, you know, keep some protein powder in your car in a shaker. So then actually that's kind of one less thing you have to think about. But yeah, it's not easy. Like it still takes a lot of thought, and, you know, I appreciate it's not going to be everyone's top priority all the time. But I think if you really want to progress in things, just making some small, little meaningful changes goes a long, long way for your training and just how you feel in life.
Yeah. So before an event then, because you're saying like one of the biggest things is like the build up to it.
Yeah.
And I hear all about like carb loading.
Yeah.
How do you carb load? Because like there's so much like conflicting information out there. And it's I know it depends on like what your event is. So like carb loading for like a 5k is different from carb loading for a 50k.
Yes. Yeah, so carb loading is, I mean, it's often been like your pasta the night before, like that's the classic, like, oh, I just eat pasta and I've eaten some carbs. It's a lot more than that. So we'd recommend carb load anything over about an hour and a half. So for example, if someone is a speedy half marathoner, they might not need to carb load, but if they're slow, I mean, slow is still outrageously fast time to do an hour and a half, but if they're going to take longer than that, then they might benefit from a bit of carb loading. Now, in terms of the kind of the length and the amount, that's where it varies a little bit. So if you were doing, say, a half marathon, I'd say the day before, you know, an increase in carbohydrate is going to be what you're needing. But if you've got a bigger event, then the 48 hours before is where you're likely to see the best gains. Now, in terms of the amount, so to truly carb load, you need 10 to 12 grams of carbohydrate per kilo body weight per day. Now that is loads, and I can sit here having, you know, ploughed my way through a lot of carbohydrates in my time. It is a lot and takes a lot of planning. For most people, you probably will still see the benefits of kind of around 8 grams per kilo. So I'd say for most people, trying to get that to that kind of 8 grams is probably A, more attainable, and B, probably going to be sufficient. But if someone's quite a serious athlete, then we're trying to get them up to that 10 where possible. And it's it's more than just eating. It's not just eating everything. So it's about kind of a bit more strategic than that. So the idea is that you're tapering for an event and you want to top up those stores. So I was talking about the glycogen earlier in our bodies. It's all about making sure you stand on that start line as kind of tip top as possible, feeling, as energized. And it's not eating more, it's making sure you just basically all you're eating is carbohydrates. So protein is less important for those days. It doesn't matter too much. Having a little bit, say, for taste and just a bit of variety, but put your protein goals out the window. That's not today's problem. Reducing down the amount of fiber in your diet as well. So so we get fiber from like fruits and vegetables and skins and seeds and like whole grains. What fiber does is it kind of forms a bit of bulk as well, and it can sit and be a bit more heavy, can increase chances of kind of gastro issues, but also makes it more difficult to eat the larger quantity as well. So cutting the fibre out, so switching to white breads, white pastas, not worrying too much from kind of the fruit and vegetable side of things, and then minimising down the amount of fat in your diet as well, because fat can sit, it can be quite heavy, often feel a bit uncomfortable and increase your risk of gastro issues. So basically white carbs all the way. So like it's something that requires a bit of practice. And trying. A lot of people will say, oh, I tried it and I felt terrible. Like felt so bloated and I was just eating. And that can happen, but it's finding what works for you. So a lot of the time, like rice-based products can work a bit better than some of like the breads and pastas, and especially because they've got lots of wheat in, that can increase people's kind of amount of bloating that they can get. So I'd say rice is often a good solid bet, but it's trying it. So I've been practicing my last couple of kind of events to kind of see what I can do, and like a bit of market research as well, and to see, and things like using fruit juices or like Lucozade, like drinks like that can be great because they're easy top ups. What else? What did I have last time? So I did UTS at Ultra Trail Snowdonia, 55k recently, and I did hit 10? I hit 8 on one of the days and 10 grams on the other day, and it was really hard work. I had like fried rice with a little bit of tiny, like a few peas in there just for a bit of variety. I made myself like a sushi bowl. That was quite successful actually. Because you can get quite a lot of volume, kind of rice, I think I had a bit of salmon in there just for a bit of, jazz it up a little bit. And then rice cakes are another great option because they're low calorie but quite high carbs, and you can get quite a few down. Not the most exciting thing in the world, but they're going to tick the box. I've just written a carb loading plan for someone else. Gnocchi can be quite a good one as well if you're not kind of too much of a rice based. You can get the potato kind of based dish as well. Often you can eat a fairly decent amount as well. Rice pudding, that's a great one. You have a whole tin of that. What are some other good options? I'm trying to think what else I would recommend. Using things like slices of toast or little snacks. So the idea is that you kind of are basically grazing the entire day. You need to eat 3 meals plus snacks to get that amount, and that may seem very unattainable, and does require a bit of planning to get that amount. Otherwise you just find you just haven't eaten enough. But any increase that you do will be helpful. So it doesn't have to be hitting those numbers, but still prioritizing the carbohydrates, resting, relaxing, making sure you're drinking plenty as well to be well hydrated. All of those things will help. And it's thinking, right, if I've never tried it before, perhaps note down what you did eat and actually how far off were you, and then think, could I have had a higher carbohydrate lunch option that was a bit better. Okay, maybe next time rather than having, that salad for lunch, I'm going to have, some rice and a couple of veg on the side or whatever, as a way of a bit of a kind of a better switch. And so it's just being that step ahead of the game. And that's why, especially if people are traveling for races, that's when it really takes some organisation, because otherwise then you turn up in a foreign country or somewhere where you don't know and you're like, oh gosh, I don't even know how to do this, because there's literally, literally kind of no options. A client I supported ran across India. We turned up in India and it was all kind of pretty hectic and like all over the shop. I was like, okay, how are we going to do this? And so we had biryani, which is rice based. There was a great little biryani place opposite where we were staying. So we had that for lunch and dinner, and like a couple of little drinks and things. So it wasn't optimal, but it was as good as it was kind of, I guess, going to get, and probably could have been a bit better prepared on that, but equally we had no idea what we were going to turn up to. So it's difficult and it's not easy, but it genuinely does make a difference, and the research and the evidence is really there in terms of it increases your time to exhaustion and minimize that risk of fatigue. And actually it's quite a long, I wish I could remember the exact stats. It's a few percent in terms of the increasing the length of time to exhaustion. I think over kind of a 4-hour marathon, that's kind of 3-4 minutes. That's actually quite a lot in that time period. And most people are getting jazzy shoes that got all the carbon plate to get those minutes. Actually, if you focused on your diet, you could probably get those minutes without dishing 200 quid on shoes. Do them together, and the PBs are there.
Yeah. When it comes to like the multi-day stuff, then like obviously it's going to be important to carb load before then, but like there's only so much carb loading you can do, and then it's going to be like ineffective. Like, how would you then manage that for the multi-day stuff?
Yeah, so multi-day is a bit of a whole nother ball game. So definitely carb load before the start. It depends on kind of what kind of multi-day. So if you've got set stages and then you've kind of got rests and you've got access to food, what I would say between those stages is having that getting that recovery snack in early. So whether that be something like a protein shake or some food that you're nibbling on straight away to get that high protein and high carb, you're then focusing on getting kind of a high carb meal in as well, and kind of rehydrating are the key things. So I did a multi-day event in Jordan a couple of years ago, so in the desert, so it was pretty hot. So, and you only had limited access to food. So it also depends what you can get as well. So every day I'd have some snacks. So something like beef jerky was quite a good option because it was nice and light and kind of high protein. Get that in kind of immediately alongside some form of kind of carbohydrates. So Pringles were my ultimate favourite that week. I was rarely seen without a packet of Pringles. My little tub kind of walking around whilst I was kind of sorting myself out. And then, getting that rehydration in, so that you might need some electrolytes and things at that point to try and help promote it because you don't have much time. If you had something like a protein shake, that would be great. Ideally, if you can mix that protein shake with milk to get the carbohydrates in as well, even better, but might not always be possible. Then it's having that meal to be as high a carb as possible to get that in, and then just those little snacks, and then kind of repeat. It is really difficult because you're always going to be in a bit of a deficit, and what I found, and certainly having been in kind of the environment myself and with clients, is appetites can tend to tail off days in. I've got a very good appetite and I could eat everything, and things like dehydrated meals don't faze me in the slightest. I quite like them, so I was still getting like my 1,000-calorie bags down, no problem, and others were sitting there like, I can't stomach this. And therefore it's thinking about variety of like what is easier. Is something like a pot noodle going to be a bit easier to kind of get down, or is there something else? And kind of that variety aspect is where you get the best. And also that fueling whilst you're running on those multi-day ones, not being like, oh, I've only got 10k to go left today, I'll just kind of not do it. You're fueling for today, but also fueling for tomorrow. So it's trying to maximize as much consistently and not tailing off the end of the day and be like, oh, just have a break, because that's always where the mistakes happen, because actually then you're in more of a deficit that then harder to bring yourself out of. If you're doing something that's more kind of continuous, that's where it gets a bit more difficult. There is more evidence that's come out recently that actually we should be anything over kind of 12 hours or so. A bit of protein whilst you're exercising can be helpful, just to minimize that damage later on, and down the line. So every kind of 4 or 5 hours having kind of 20 grams of protein can be helpful. Protein also makes you feel kind of a bit more full as well, and if you're going overnight, can help keep you awake. So a bit of a protein booster before you go into the night, or kind of as it's getting dark, can be helpful from a kind of trying to override that overwhelming need to sleep, which is unsurprising because that's what we do. So that does get a little bit more difficult, and it's not going to be optimal. Like it rarely is, because you don't have the amount, you can't carry enough, you generally can't pick up enough on the go. But it's thinking about kind of well-timed options and not missing those those opportunities to have, say, that recovery snack straight away, not finishing the day being like, oh, I need to sit down for a bit, or I'll sort my bag out, or go and have a shower if you've got things like that. It's right, I finished, my priority is having that snack, get that in, get that drink, right, now I can kind of move on, I suppose. So kind of it's just ticking those boxes. But it is difficult. It's never optimal, but sometimes you've got to go with what you can, and something's better than nothing.
Yeah. What about the importance of like micronutrients and things like that, especially on like the multi-day stuff? Because like that's one thing I worry about, where I'm like, oh, I've done like ultras and stuff, and I can survive off squares bars and Mars bars and sweets. But when I'm doing that like 6 days in a row, like, how's my body going to respond to that?
Is that okay? Generally, it's okay. What I would say is, yes, 6 days feels like a long time to eat squares bars and Mars bars, and you're like, oh, I just don't know if this is good for me. I think there's probably a lot of things not great for you about running 6 days in a row all day, but that's a whole another conversation. But actually having that, probably the main thing is making sure that day to day, so the rest of the 359 days of the year, whatever, is actually kind of things are optimal from that point. If you go into that race optimal, and you've got a good balance from your diet and from that side, then those 6 days aren't really going to matter too much. And I think from a practical perspective of either remembering or needing to have them and things is probably not that big a deal. So I'd say I wouldn't worry too much from that side. Sometimes you just crave a bit of freshness, and a bit of something different is more. And maybe afterwards then really, during that recovery period and downtime, thinking, right, I need to get a good variety in my diet. I need to get back on track. I can't just eat squares bars and Mars bars all the time, even though they're great. So I wouldn't worry too much in the short term. If someone was like, no, I'm really concerned, I'd say kind of like what we call an A to Z multivitamin. So it's a one-stop shop of it's all in one, would be about as far as I would go. There can be things like, for example, zinc, high dose zinc, if you're kind of getting kind of respiratory, so getting kind of colds and things, can reduce the length of the symptoms, but that's much more specific, and I guess that's kind of a whole nother level of stuff that I wouldn't say generally to people. If they were doing a big challenge, then yes. If you're going to be going longer than, I'd say, a week, then maybe like a multivitamin or something might be helpful, but generally I'd say don't worry about it. Get your carbohydrates in, get your protein, make sure you eat, and then make sure your diet's good from a day-to-day perspective. And I think we get so caught up sometimes in the actual, whilst we're running and things, we forget that actually if we're not have a healthy and balanced diet, then that's actually for our long term. And yes, everyone's different levels of I guess how successful or what they're aiming for, I suppose, from their running or adventures. But we want to be healthy to, minimize risk of chronic diseases and other things from, longevity as well. And it's not forgetting that, because we can get a bit caught up, I think, sometimes in the jazzy bits of sports nutrition, and then forget actually we probably just need to be generally a bit healthy and think about day to day and like actual life. And I think that's something, if I, with my clients, always make sure that should be ticking all those boxes. Is there any areas need to change or they need to add in, or thinking about, because otherwise if you're not healthy then you're not going to be able to do those adventures anyway.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, sometimes the basics are boring, but they're kind of quite necessary.
Yeah. Talking about like supplements and stuff then, are there any that you're like, right, if you're doing like endurance stuff in general, like these are the daily supplements you could take, or like any recommendations on that side of things?
Yeah, there isn't anything I'd say, generally blanket wise you need to take. It depends a bit on kind of baseline diet and what you're eating. The only things is, over the winter months, vitamin D is the recommendation for everybody. So that's a kind of a government wide recommendation of 10 micrograms, so 400 international units. It'll make sense if you have a look at a packet, and to take in the winter months, so between around October to April. And that's because we get vitamin D from the sunshine, and we don't have much sunshine. Even if we do, it's not strong enough for our skin to be able to kind of synthesize it and get that. So vitamin D over the winter is super important. And then if you're not outside a huge amount in the summer, and by like being outside, you need to be generally, to get enough vitamin D, 3 times a week between the hours of 11 and 2 in the sunshine, with arms and face exposed, not wearing suntan lotion, for about 20 minutes in with the sun beating down on you. Now, for most people who work, that's actually not that easy to do 3 times a week. Or, for it to be sunny 3 times a week at that time, you're already, the odds are shortening, and you've got to be outside, with kind of enough arms and things exposed. It can be really easy to be deficient in vitamin D, even though you're like, well, I run loads, it's fine. But actually, do you put suntan lotion on? Do you wear long sleeves? Are you out during those hours as well? That's something that some people then might need all year round supplementation of. I would just say the cheap stuff from the supermarket, own brands ones, are good, just as good. Generally, you don't need to spend loads on supplements. You'll just get a nicer bottle and a more beautiful packaging. That may be very important to you, but if it isn't, save your pennies and get the cheaper bottle. Would be my advice. Generally, you don't necessarily need anything else. There can be some things that people might benefit from, or if you're following like a vegan or vegetarian diet, then you might be more susceptible to kind of deficiencies from kind of like an iron and vitamin B12 kind of perspective, and then more supplementation may be helpful. But I'd say as a blanket rule, we shouldn't necessarily need stuff, and more doesn't necessarily mean better. Some of the vitamins and things, like, if we don't need them, we weed them out. And to be honest, if you're going to spend money, you may as well not just weird out, in my view. If they're not needed, then actually there's not necessarily the benefit. If you feel like you're not getting enough in, then actually a multivitamin sometimes is a good kind of tick box. If you're getting ill all the time, or you feel like getting injured and kind of just a bit run down, maybe a multivitamin. But actually what I'd be looking at is kind of your lifestyle and diet in general. Like, actually, are you fueling yourself enough for your training? Are you sleeping? Is your training load sound outrageous? You don't have those rest days, you're not giving your body that recovery. Actually, those are some of the more important things to focus on than be like, chuck a vitamin at it, which I know we all like to do, and I've done it myself, desperately taking vitamin C in the hope it's going to solve it, knowing that actually the really heavy week and that ultra I ran at the weekend and lack of recovery was probably why I don't feel great. And actually what I need to do is rest. But you're like, a bit of vitamin C will solve the job. It doesn't always. So yeah, I wouldn't kind of rush out and buy lots of things. There's lots of products and they always tell us they're going to do wonderful things, but you can't generally kind of taking a supplement's not often going to override a poor diet.
Yeah.
It's probably the kind of the baseline, and a few little tweaks or adds in are going to be more beneficial in the short and long term than taking something. But it is in case by case basis.
Yeah, it's all very individualized, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Most things are.
Yeah, and I think that's what we forget, is that actually everyone is different. We're all doing different things, different amounts. Like you're saying, you always take snacks to your trail run group. Actually, compared to some of them, you might have done, you know, a long run the day before and then have stuff the day after, or done a, you know, a gym session or busy all day. Actually, for you, that might be a lot more appropriate than it is for someone that this is their weekly run and they spent the day sat in the office. And I think it's always, not forgetting that and kind of thinking, actually, does this work for me? Am I doing it because I like it, maybe a strong word, because not all nutrition is obviously the most exciting, but it works for me. This is what I need. This is what my body needs. You know, often, you know, if you are running high amounts or doing lots of exercise, you need more than most people. You know, a lot of people will sit there and judge and say comments of like, oh my goodness, you eat a lot or something like that, but actually you might need it. And I think it's, you know, understanding that everyone's needs are different, and compared to the person sat next to you, you might need something a whole lot different, or need that extra snack. And it's not just you being piggy because you fancied a cake at, you know, at the end of your run. Actually, that is part of refueling.
Yeah.
And it's, it is difficult, and a lot of people do judge, and I think especially around the eating more. And, you know, I certainly find it as a woman myself, and for especially kind of ladies like, oh my goodness, you eat so much. And like, I've just been out running for 4 hours. Like, give me a break. Like, I need it. I train, 10 hours plus a week. I need a lot more. I need to fuel my body adequately to mean that I can actually do that.
Yeah.
And yes, there's good and bad ways and better ways of doing it, but I think it's so individualized, and that's why we need to always be a bit careful about blanket recommendations and things, because it's finding what works for you. And if one thing doesn't work, like with the gels and things that don't work, there'll always be another one that we can find, or something else that you can do. So it's not a, no, they don't work, I can't do this, I shouldn't have that. Actually, there's always nuance and kind of personalization.
Yeah. So for someone that's like trying to take that first step into the, like, being like, I really need to work on my nutrition, what would be like your biggest like piece of advice, or like the first step for them to take?
I guess it's thinking, it's getting that day to day, you know, forget about some of the kind of perhaps the running stuff side of things. It's thinking, you know, am I eating regularly across the day? Am I having that? Am I getting a bit of protein in? You know, look at your meals. Have I got some protein? So meat, fish, chicken, kind of dairy meat alternatives. Have I got some of that on the plate? Have I got a good source of carbohydrate? So your potatoes, rice, pastas and things. Have I got some vegetables, a salad on the plate? Have I got that bit of a balance? Am I ticking those boxes? Getting that kind of all-roundedness. You know, start basic. Actually, okay, I don't really eat many vegetables. Could I have some frozen peas? It doesn't have to be jazzy, it doesn't have to be too exciting, or a tin of sweet corn. You know, you don't have to even cook it. Can I pop that on the side of my plate, or have an apple afterwards? Can I get those little things in? You know, am I eating regularly? Am I eating before I'm exercising? Or am I getting that recovery snack in? You know, start with those basics of something is better than nothing. It may not be the optimal thing, but actually it works, and it's easy and it's practical, and then those tweaks can come, and it's forming those habits of, actually, do you know what, I never normally eat after exercise for hours. Okay, I'm going to try and get a drink in, or actually I can manage a really small nibble. Okay, start with that and then build up. You know, it doesn't have to go from the same with running, from not eating to 90 grams of carbs per hour, because trust me, you'll feel terrible if you do that, and you won't like it, you won't enjoy it. But actually, can you get to that 20 grams? Can you get to that 25, 30, 35, 40? Start small, you know, little actionable changes, like adding in, actually, I'm going to buy a bag of apples to eat an apple a day. It doesn't have to be exciting.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be big, but you've got to have your reasons and wanting to do it as well. And, you know, don't forget your health at the end of the day. But, you know, one thing I would say is, I guess, be careful where you're getting your information from. There's a lot of misinformation out there for nutrition on the internet. Social media is a nightmare for it. And a lot of people giving very personalised opinions, which are great, but as we've already discussed, doesn't necessarily work for everybody. You know, thinking about, you know, registered healthcare professionals, so people that have, you know, degrees and using the evidence-based information. So For example, as a dietitian, if I sat here and told you all to, you should be eating loads of celery because that's what you should be having, and you're like, I don't think so, I could get struck off and not be able to practice because that's not legitimate information. And same as if I sat here with the supplements and told you, there's actually a really great brand called so-and-so that you should have. Turns out I get paid if you buy it without there being a reason to have it and kind of disclosing that. That's me falsely leading you. And I think so it's hopefully what that can do is kind of as dietitians is trust that we're following the evidence, and therefore actually if something is recommended, you're taking it. I'm not just doing it for either my own kind of personal financial gain or, jumping on any trend, for example. It is what it's needed. Nutrition, so nutritionist isn't a protected title. There are kind of accredited nutritionists and not. And I would always just be a little bit wary, I guess, have that kind of maybe a bit of barrier up if you're reading about something and it's sounding too good to be true or too great. And this is where, dietitians are a bit boring, but it probably is. That pill isn't going to override that over diet. That drink isn't going to solve all those problems. It may be good, but it's probably not everything. So kind of have a little think, and if you're getting advice or following someone on social media, for example, ask them what their qualifications are. If they put the barriers up or they don't want to tell you, that's probably because they don't have the adequate information or qualifications to be dishing out that advice. I'd be absolutely delighted if someone asked me for my qualifications, because then I could be like, I've got these degrees and this is it, or you can find me on professional register, for example. It's just having a little bit of a think. Is someone trying to sell me something? Because that's always a red flag, I would say. Is it too good to be true? Is it a little bit like potentially a bit faddy and trendy? Just kind of think, or ask someone, like, where did you get that information from? Is there some research that I could go and read? I appreciate not everyone wants to go and read a research paper, but if there is, at least they can provide it for you.
Yeah.
If they don't, if they're like, oh no, this is just something I do, that would be a red flag for me for like, okay.
Yeah.
Is this totally true? So I think just be a little bit careful, because it's a difficult space.
Yeah, definitely. I've got a question that's been sent in for you, so let me just get it up. So this was sent in by someone that actually came on the podcast not that long ago. I'm awful with technology, as I've already told you, so it takes me a while to find things. And then she sent it to me separately because it was too long to fit in the question box.
Oh goodness, here we go.
No, I can't find her. There we go. So she said, is there any truth in real food and slow release carbs being more effective for a 100 to 200 mile running event, fueling over gels and bars, etc.?
I think it's individual. I would say the slower release is kind of more your complex carbs. What that then tends to be is higher fiber stuff, rather than say like your white breads, your bars, your gels. They're kind of quick. What we mean by quick release is you get the energy from them, so your body absorbs that glucose, so the energy, and then you can utilize it. Whereas with other stuff, it can take a bit longer. There's pros and cons with that, because the quick release moves through our stomach and gets absorbed nice and quickly, which also means it's not sitting there. Anything that's a bit slower release as well and higher in fiber takes longer for our body to digest. And if it's taking longer, it's sitting in your stomach and then, your digestive system longer. And what can happen when you're running is if that's hanging around, there's more likelihood that can cause you tummy issues. So feeling uncomfortable, bloated, needing the toilet, feeling a bit sick, whatever. People often have slightly different ways which they kind of feel that. That can then be a little bit more difficult. But some people can manage it a lot better. And especially on those longer ones, you are going slower. So there is a bit less kind of the whole joggling as you run is part of the reason why it's really uncomfortable to eat, because it's not very natural to eat and then it to get bashed up and down. You probably can manage a little bit more, but it's probably around timing, I would say, is thinking about if you are going to be stopping on those longer events or resting, kind of get to an aid station or kind of going to sleep for an hour or two, is have that, as more of a meal before you have a snooze. So you've got a bit of time for everything to digest and go down, rather than necessarily getting the bulk kind of in. Another pro of things like some of the gels and bars is that they're really high in carbs. So what it means is you don't have to eat loads and loads. Some of the other kind of, and this is the case for some real food as well, it's more difficult, and like the savoury stuff, it's more difficult to get in the volume, to get enough carbohydrates in. So like, for example, a bread roll, for example, is about 30 grams of carbs. That's quite a lot compared to, quick squish of a gel in. You have to work quite hard to get that all in. And so it takes a lot longer and can be a bit more difficult. And make that into a wholemeal roll, that's going to be a bit harder to digest and take longer as well. So yes, you can do, and I think adding a bit of protein in there as well, from those longer siders mentioned earlier, is definitely going to be helpful. But a lot of people might find it just starts to sit a bit heavy and makes it a bit less comfortable. But practice, see if it works. If you like it, if it ticks that box, if it gives that variety, and it doesn't cause you any issues, then that's not a problem. As they say, like a burger is not something we would typically tell people to have, but actually if it works well and it provides that something different, then that's ticking a lot of boxes. Yeah. So it's generally, most people might struggle, but actually if you can, go for gold.
Yeah, amazing. Well, what's coming up next for you then?
So I am. What have I got coming up? I've got a bikepacking race. So nice. 1,000-kilometer race in Norway, which is a self-supported number, and that's a whole nother ball game with nutrition, because you've got to carry and stop, and that's quite a difficult one to manage. So I've got that in August, and then I am doing the Seven Valleys Ultra in September, which is in the Lake District, which is 110 kilometres.
Nice.
So that's going to be my furthest ever, which is exciting, I think. I don't know. It'd be nice to get that distance, but it's going to be a whole new ball game of going into the night and all of that jazz. So yeah, lots of running and cycling, which is hence why I'm in my cycling kit. As people are looking, I am in cycling kit because I'm going to cycle back to get a bit of training.
Yeah, 80 miles, roughly.
Yeah, roughly 80 miles. Be a good little spin for the legs in the sunshine, hopefully.
Yeah. Right, where can people go to follow you with your nutritional advice and also just your adventures?
So I'm on Instagram, very boringly named Rachel White Nutrition, so it's nice and easy to find me. So that's the main place, but also I've got a website, so www.rachelwhitenutrition.com. Equally, very easy and boring. So those are the main places. But yeah, if you have any questions or anything, then just send me a message.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate your time.
No, thanks for having me.
Yeah, good luck with your 2 upcoming adventures.
Thank you very much.
Thanks again for listening to another episode of the Adventure Athletes podcast. To find out more about Rachel, she's given out her socials and everything, so head over and talk to her about everything nutrition. It was a really insightful chat, and she really knows what she's on about. And she's a true adventure athlete as well. Like, she got the train down and she cycled home, and she's from Bristol, so it's not exactly round the corner. I think it was about an 80-mile cycle back. And she's always off on her own adventures as well, which we didn't really get to talk about too much. Maybe we'll have to get her back on and talk about them some more. But if you want to find out more about Adventure Athletes and what we offer, whether that's online plans, in-person training, sports massage or outdoor activity days, then you can head over to the website adventureathletes.co.uk. We've actually got a course running at the end of this month, the Abergavenny 3 Peaks. Now, as I'm recording this, we still have 4 spaces remaining. I have no idea how many are going to be remaining by the time this episode comes out. So to guarantee your spot, head over to the website and book on. If not, we've got the National 3 Peaks the month after, so at the end of, or in the middle of September-ish. And then next year we're going to have a whole lot more if everything goes to plan. So yeah, lots of things to look forward to. But thank you again for your support and for listening and following along with my journey. Until next week, guys.